Hi, and welcome back to episode 9 of Differential Diagnosis, where we'll be differentially diagnosing season 1, episode 10 of House M.D. called Histories, also known as the end of the Foreman trilogy, because yes, it's a third Foreman episode. My name's Harvey, I'm co-hosting, and co-hosting with me is my co-host Gaz.
Pleasure to be here, Harvey, reviewing this most historic episode since it's the finale of the Foreman trilogy.
The best trilogy since The Godfather.
Yes.
There's a lot of Foreman. But yeah, it is interesting that they're just focusing on Foreman so much. But hey, I guess he's got the most to work with. He's like a grumpy, annoyed man with like a complicated backstory.
Yeah, and he's the ultimate. Well, he's kind of like a mixture of being a foil to House, but also being the most like House.
Yeah, absolutely. I can totally see why Foreman's being like worked on so much. It's just interesting that one character is getting the limelight, but we'll try and sum up the entire Foreman trilogy and see what we've learned about him at the end.
Of course.
Well, yes, we're here. We're a few days late because Gaz selfishly decided to go on holiday to Princeton, which, Gaz, was that some weird House M.D. pilgrimage?
Well, of course it was. Yes. I went there. I took a photo of the building used for the Princeton Plainsboro Hospital, which was most satisfying. And then I flew back. That was it. I just went to see that.
Yeah, because we talked during your holiday, but the only two pictures you sent me were of the weird medicine adverts, drug adverts that they have in America, and just a picture of Princeton Plainsboro, which I received at about 2 a.m. because of the time difference.
Yeah. Well, you know me. I'm obsessed with medicine. So, the thing about American medical ads is that this is what fascinated me, was the fact that they'll advertise as medicine that will change your life, and then they'll have the equally upbeat kind of video playing while they list all of the complications that may arise or any precluding illnesses that might kill you if you take the medicine.
Yeah, well, it will change your life still, in the same way that a gun to the head will change your life.
Oh, right, yeah. I didn't say it that way. But now you put it like that, it definitely will.
It's just different kind of life-changing.
It will get rid of the disease, that's for sure.
Yeah, if you want to change your life, either win the lottery or get in a car accident.
Jesus. Oh, my God.
2 of the quickest ways to change your life.
Quickest? Wow.
Yes, so today we're going to run through episode 10, Histories. Gaz, are you all right to give us a quick synopsis of the episode? But obviously everyone should watch the episode before we talk about it. Like, that's definitely the easiest way, because that's just, I assume, would be the nicest way to follow this podcast. But yeah, Gaz, if you want to give us a synopsis just to fill everyone in.
Well, this synopsis is powered by house.fandom.com. Histories is a first season episode of House, which first aired on February 8th, 2005. Wilson is convinced a homeless Jane Doe in the emergency room has a real illness, but Foreman is convinced she's faking symptoms to stay in the hospital. House takes the case just to spite Foreman, but even when they find who she is and what's wrong with her, the treatment makes her worse.
It's a classic House setup.
Indeed.
And I have to admit, I was quite stupid when I first watched this, like back when it aired, and I thought her name was Jane Doe, because I'd never heard of the John Doe, Jane Doe thing.
Oh my God. You're like, why are they so worried about who she is? They already know who she is.
Yeah, it's like, Jane. They know her name. It's just like when I was watching it, I just heard Jane Doe, and I was like, I remember thinking that was a real name. It's very funny watching this episode, like, because I know we talked about this before, but the show is really old now. like the
Yeah.
first season. Like it's just one of those things that you forget it's 14 years ago, and then I mean, the first time I was watching it, I was like a very young teenager, so I was in a completely different brain state. And it's just weird the nostalgic flashes you get back, not just about the show itself, but just about how incredibly stupid you were.
Your brain was developing, Harvey. And but I'm surprised you didn't come across Jane Doe in any other context. So you must have gone through this whole episode just thinking they've got a name. Why don't you just check the records?
I guess so. I don't know. I was like young. I mean, like when you're below 13, like your life is like a fever dream, right? Like it's not real. You have no idea why you're thinking things. It's good. I mean, it's funny. It's good that you've watched the show like within the year, because you haven't. You're a very well educated, cultured, older man.
Why, thank you.
You pick it up straight away.
I dispute the older, but whatever. I'll take it.
Fair enough. All right. You dispute away.
Oh, thanks.
But yeah, we're back. We've watched the episode. We're gonna watch it again while talking about it. Join us while we talk about Histories, or Foreman Part 3, the return of the Foreman.
This is my favourite part. She's obviously just a scruff. She's trying to get into this rave with the man with a hat and a Hawaiian shirt on. He looks like a dime store Johnny Depp. That's my assumption. That's my kind of analysis.
It is actually. Do you know what? It's an interesting opening. Like, it's not, when it's like set in a school and a kid shits himself and then collapses. Like those kind of openings are really boring. But this, we will go in, because I think you and I have shared feelings about the histories element of this, of the story, because the story is very focused on people's backstories and how it like affects the way they think and the way they make assumptions about people.
Yeah.
But in this opening, she's trying to get into a rave. She's clearly homeless. She looks very ill or on drugs, and she's asking about, is it someone called John?
Yeah.
It's a very mysterious setup, and it's very interesting. It like grabs your attention instantly. But it's quite funny because it's like the guy's there, like a complete really hip guy asking for like $20 to come into this rave, and she's just like sort of a bordering middle-aged like homeless woman.
But then there's this weird kind of subplot that's going. There's like this story. This woman's trying to pull this homeless woman.
Yeah.
And tries to drug her. I'm like, what?
Yeah, because
what is going on?
She isn't like the guy in the first like scene. The hip guy who lets her into the party kind of makes a reference to the fact that she hasn't brushed her teeth or anything. And then, immediately when she goes into the club, this very good-looking woman with some pills, like, just tries to make out with her and give her some ecstasy by making out with her. And I was like, damn, like, that's never happened to me. And she's... So,
Maybe I should dress up like a scruff more often. That wouldn't change much.
But, just... immediately gets into it. She's looking around this house party. She's clearly looking for someone. She then gets drugged, although she doesn't actually take any of the drugs. The police come in. One of them tackles her at the rave, and then she
has a seizure. Yeah.
Fair enough. So then then it's straight into it. But I think it's a pretty good setup. It like has a lot of mystery to it, unlike most where it's like teenagers having sex or.
Where's my electrolytes?
Yeah, exactly. Like something like that. It's Yeah, which I think sets the tone for the whole episode, because the whole episode it's very backstory focused. The histories theme being a pretty obvious reference to that, which is the one thing I quite like about these early episodes, and House in general, because it does this a lot. But it's nice that it's not just a medical procedural. Like, each episode does have themes. And I know that that's not always that's not like an amazing thing for a TV show to do. But for the type of show it is, we've had talking about exploring infidelity and trust, and philosophical methods and religion. And now this one's about our backstories, and we spend the entire episode finding out about the patient's backstory and how that backstory affects people's assumptions of her, and how their backstories in turn affect those assumptions. There's more going on here than there needs to be.
There needs to be. So you think it's a bit unnecessary?
No, I mean, because, well, I mean more than more than is required of a medical procedural. Like, I think House could have been a lot lazier than it needs to be.
What gets me about this episode as well is every time Foreman is confronted by evidence that kind of refutes his cynicism, he just automatically snaps back, goes, "No, it's definitely still a homeless person who needs some food," and then they can get busted out again.
Yeah.
And I think that's more about the resilience of our biases sometimes, or how our past influences us way more than we think. And we'd like to think we're all very rational and we can get over our biases, or that we don't have biases at all. But most of the time it's just a kind of low-level denial that permeates our judgments.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it's some pretty good... it's not character development as such, but it's character revealing. It's nice that the characters... because it's... Because I don't feel like this has come out of anywhere. It's not like, in a lot of shows that you watch and you feel like the character's just being stupid or just making irrational decisions. Like, this episode, Foreman is being quite hostile to this homeless woman because he doesn't trust her. He thinks she's faking. But it in turn, I think it's fleshed out a lot. And it's at least interesting. It's not just Foreman is being randomly irrational and hateful. It's... he has a thing about this specific topic. Yeah. And it's totally justified from his end, at least.
And we see it from the other end, where Wilson is with lobbying House to take on this case with his own impassioned plea that this person is kind of homeless. And we figure that out later on.
Yeah, because it's about how Foreman has no compassion for this woman because of his assumptions about homeless people. But in a way, Wilson's compassion to them is equally irrational, because if we skip ahead a bit to some of the context of it, Foreman is suspicious that the woman has overdosed on insulin, and she's lying about her condition in order to get a free meal. And Wilson is saying, no, that's not the case. She's actually ill. A bit later on in the episode, it actually turns out that she is ill, but that she had also overdosed on insulin in order to get into the hospital for her other symptoms to be looked at. So it's quite interesting in that way, in that even though both of them are making assumptions, it's not like the episode doesn't just turn into, actually, Foreman was 100% wrong, and every homeless person would never do such a thing. Foreman is just misjudged. It's they're both right. Foreman has made an actually accurate judgment that somebody would fake symptoms in order to get into the hospital to get a meal and a free room. But at the same time, she's also sick. So in that way, Wilson is irrationally giving her too little of the benefit of the doubt, or too much of the benefit of the doubt, and Foreman is doing the opposite.
No, I think I agree with that.
But yeah, do you think what do you think about the focus on Foreman?
Well, I think it's interesting in this one because it actually frames the motivation for why House has taken on the case, because it's interesting that to him that Foreman is so adamantly against the idea that maybe she is illegitimately ill.
Hmm.
And there is evidence to support his case, but there are also lots of evidence to support that she is legitimately ill.
Yeah, but but her case like isn't. Yeah, it's interesting that they've changed the focus on the because House only takes a case when it's interesting. That's really what they are like hammering that into the ground in these early
Yeah.
episodes. But yeah, for now it's interesting that they've tweaked it, that because usually House would take a case based on the symptoms or based on because somebody just forced him to or something like that. But it's interesting that in this one he's taking the case because somebody doesn't want the case.
Yeah, and he finds that interesting. And I think mainly because he thinks that there might be a lesson to be gleaned for Foreman. I think one of the reasons it focuses on Foreman so much is that he is both a foil to House, but also a kind of, he matches the same kind of temperament as House. He's intense. He's very sure of himself when he's in a position of authority.
Yeah.
And he takes decisive action.
And do you actually think he takes it to learn a lesson or just to mess with Foreman? It's quite interesting that you're giving him the benefit of the doubt that he even cares about like helping someone grow.
Yeah. That, and I think also the lobbying from Wilson must take in some sort of consideration. Maybe I'm reading a bit too much into it with House trying to teach him a lesson, but he certainly feels there's something strange about how Foreman is prejudging this case without actually doing the proper procedure of taking an actual history, finding out who this person is, rather than just assuming it's just Jane Doe and that's it.
This might be me being all conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
I wonder if... Do you remember in the pilot the way we talked about how House is different in the pilot? He's more subdued and he's less sort of energetic, and like he's more of like a mentor. He's more of like a sort of watchful sort of mentor who's just interested and is always prodding. But he's not like quite as insane as we've seen him in the later episodes. I think from episode 2, he's a lot more sort of in your face. He's a lot more mean.
Yeah.
I would say. I suspect, because I think House is really different in this episode, and it's one of those things where you kind of have to watch it in order to get that, because I can't quite describe why. But House is sort of sitting there very neatly dressed in his polo shirt, in his little turtleneck, and there's no real standout. Like, even though he's got this situation where kind of Foreman and Wilson are all lobbying for, who's right and fighting over the patient, I don't know. He takes a back seat.
Yeah, and I think that's shown in the way he's kind of cut into the scenes. So the establishing shots in some of the scenes is always in the background, while there's a swirling of the 4 other characters, and then sometimes he's not, but mainly he seems more in the background than usual.
Yeah, this feels like episode like pilot House. I don't know. Am I making it up? I just because I've seen the episode after, which is Detox, which is a fantastic episode. I really can't wait to talk about that one. But yeah, he's very off in this. I wonder if it's like a bit of a throwback. It might have even been written by. I know that this is written by, I can't remember his name, but this is the first episode for someone. So I wonder if he kind of had the original like synopsis or bio for House that he was running off of before they kind of changed him a bit for the second episode. I don't know, it's just something I've noticed, but I'm just conferring with you whether or not I'm talking absolute rubbish or not.
I don't know. I really don't know in this case. But yeah, I do think he's a little bit more distant. He kind of just pops in and out. Another and that's true. And also, one of the main scenes where he's in the front, not in the background. Sorry, not foreground.
Yeah.
In front is when he's looking at the comic books, and he has a preoccupation with them. And I think that is, those comic books are like the history of the patient front and center. Sometimes they seem incomprehensible to people, but if you probe into them, you'll find something. And you find throughout the entire episode, he'll be looking through and flipping through these comic books that have been written by the patient, and there's a reason for that. It's a reason that it's staring Foreman in the face, but he can't really grasp it throughout the episode, that he needs to look into the history of the patient, not just be so self-assured and confident in his own prejudices, or at least be able to check his prejudices and take proper histories of the patient.
Yeah. Well, on to the backstory of the patient. Yeah, I think this patient mystery is really different to the other ones. And okay, so in like fidelity, the backstory is kind of, it's related to the medicine, right? It's like the mystery is, how did she get ill? And then it's like, how did she get ill? And then it turns out that she's had an affair, and that's the mystery. They have to uncover who had the affair. And then for the Socratic method, for instance, there's there's a mystery there. It's like, oh, does she have schizophrenia? Doesn't she? And then they find out that it's Wilson's syndrome and that it's too much copper. So like there's that mystery there, but it's always like to do with the medicine. Whereas her mystery is a bit weird. So she's constantly looking around. Is it Jack that she's looking for?
Mr. Fury. And also, Jack, I think.
Yeah, so in this comic book, she's come up with some characters called Mr. Fury and Jack, and she's specifically always asking for a person called Jack, who we don't know who it is, but she seems
James,
to think...
sorry.
Oh, James, that's the one. So, she seems to think that James is a real person, and they don't know if it's like a hallucination or not. But, but interestingly, so that plot line, that mystery doesn't have anything to do with the medicine. She just has plain old rabies from being on the street. But Gaz, like, do you want to go into what her backstory is for everyone and like sum it up? Because it's like, if you talk about it, if you like fill everyone in, then we can kind of talk about why it's a particularly weird mystery for the show.
So basically, Mr. Fury is Paul Furia, who is Jane Doe's husband, and James is her son, and they both died in a car crash, which she was also in, which is where she received the surgical pin that nearly got torn out of her body when they put her in the MRI machine.
Yeah, there are like allusions to it, aren't there?
Yeah. And all sorts of things, like there are little hints and clues throughout the whole thing. And I think the reason is all of this kind of foreshadowing is there to kind of emphasize the point that sometimes our past, the way that we interpret or manifest our past and histories, can be coded or mythologized and changed. And sometimes they stare you right in the face, and if you can just interpret them properly, you'll find the solution. So there's that element to it. It's also very strange because it what happens in the episode is that's just left, once that's found out, it's just left hanging. It's kind of like a pallor or a kind of vibe that kind of adds to the tragedy of her death, but doesn't add much to the actual solving of the mystery of why she is ill.
She does die, by the way. Spoilers for everyone. She dies of rabies.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. But so it's kind of a bit weird. It's a bit tonally weird, and because it's never really, there's no real resolution because she dies. She doesn't get, like in an earlier episode, it's not like it gets resolved like a Just So story, once mad, now sane, once ill, now better, but also better on a spiritual or kind of mental level. That doesn't happen. She just dies.
Well,
and it's over.
Yeah, and like that's what I was alluding to before when I was talking about like the difference between like this one and Fidelity. It's like this mystery is just about this person's background, and they cure her regardless of that.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, it helps. It alludes to some things, like they sort of throws some red herrings because they don't know if like this was caused by the car accident she was in. But yeah, like the story is, like even after they cure her, then Wilson and Foreman like find out where she used to live, and they go looking around her house, and they use the comic books to like decode that there's a box in one of the back bedrooms.
Yeah.
And then in the box, they find all of the documentation necessary to find out that she had a husband, she had a baby, they both died in a car accident, and we learn like the context behind those comic books. So yeah, like the comic books kind of allude, that's a really interesting point about like how we codify and mythologize like our history. But yeah, the actual like way that they then just leave the hospital, like break into a building and like use her comic books like a treasure map is really strange.
Yeah.
Like I don't think I noticed it the first few times I watched it, but looking back at it now, it's really weird and really out of place. It's like, because they're not being doctors at this point. Like they even know where she got the rabies from. She got it from bats that were in her tent where she sleeps because she's homeless. So it's like not like they're looking around for like, kind of environmental reason. They just break into this random house and like go looking for it. And it's a nice little plot. It's a nice little mystery, but it just kind of doesn't make any sense that like, would Wilson and Foreman after the case, after she died, been like, hey, what was that whole James thing about? Do you want to like go for a beer and go and break into this house? I've got the treasure map.
Yeah, it's a little bit too twee.
Yeah.
And goes against the grain of the entire season, the entire season thus far, which is to kind of try and be as logical and as methodical as possible. So it is a bit it's a little bit too sentimental for my tastes, and that's probably one of the reasons why I'm not the biggest fan of this episode. But I think at least it is engaging on the bigger level, the kind of not bigger level, broader level, and explores a concept. But those sorts of moments just throw me off a little bit too much.
Yeah, because you were telling me before we start recording this that you think this is a bit of a filler episode.
Just a little
which
bit.
I kind of agree, but it's a bit of a weird filler episode because it also because it explores Wilson and Foreman's like a disagreement on a subject, which the show often, that seems to be the way that the show often like explores like character backstories. It just picks up on a subject and then has the characters disagree on it, and that's how we learn about them. The last episode, DNR, is a good example. It's about like House's methodology, and Foreman and like House and the doctor of the patient are disagreeing, and then Foreman's caught in the middle of that, and he has to decide who he thinks is right, which tells you a lot about Foreman. But in this one, it's like we learn about Foreman and Wilson. We learn that like, kind of Foreman's view on like homeless people, and like he kind of sees them as failures because I guess he came from a tough situation, so he kind of has like put himself as better than them because he got out of it, so why can't they? And then we learn about like Wilson, his tragic story with his brother who was homeless and he hasn't seen him, so Wilson like is sympathetic towards homeless people for that reason. But it's even though we learn a lot about them, it's good to be learning some stuff about Wilson as well finally.
Yeah.
But you're right, like it's weird. It's like it's a filler episode, but it's not.
Yeah. Maybe it's less that I guess I think it's a filler episode is though I'm getting kind of Foreman fatigue. It's like, okay, we can learn. I hope putting it in their situation 2005, they're probably thinking, let's get these out, let's set this dynamic up, because we might not get to see it ever played out in the future seasons because it might not get renewed. So I can understand that exploration of the relationship, but I don't know. Oh no, she's getting in the ice bath. Oh, Jesus Christ.
That's a great scene.
Oh, Foreman's looking at her with like kind of stern eyes, and he's thinking, oh shit, I've made a boo-boo here. She's ill after all.
Yeah, well, it's a nice... It's a nice bit of a kick to Foreman's hubris.
Or maybe he's still convinced. He's like, why are we wasting all this ice on this homeless woman?
Yeah, just run a cold tap, put her out in the snow. She loves it.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Maybe it is, because it's weird that both you and I felt it was kind of a fillery episode, but it seems important. But maybe it's just there's too much Foreman. I don't feel like we have not had any real episode. Like Cameron's had one episode focused on her. Chase has had like a subplot focused on him. There are more to come, but it's weird. Foreman gets a lot of traction at this part of the series, and I mean, we'll see as we go on, but I don't remember this much focus being put on any of the other secondary characters.
Not yet.
In this season, even.
Because we're getting Vogler soon.
Well, yeah, there's the Vogler arc. And it's all about Vogler.
Is it Vogler or Vogler?
It's Vogler, but Edward Vogler is a way funnier name. But yeah, we got the Vogler arc coming up soon, so it's so yeah, it's just it's weird. There's a lot of Foreman here, and that's why we're taking the piss out of being the Foreman trilogy. Like, it's just Foreman.
Yeah,
and Foreman's interesting, but because he's I don't know. It's strange. I wish that they would explore some more characters,
or maybe have changed the order of the episodes a little bit. Bringing in the other characters' issues, and then going back to Foreman again, rather than If they could have done that, I guess it would depend on a few factors.
Well, Foreman, like DNR, the last episode, like Foreman had that's such a big moment for Foreman. Like, he's being offered a great job and a chance for a new life with like another doctor who is complete antithesis of House, and yet he chooses House. Like, that's a big character moment. And maybe this feels a bit flat because it goes from that to Foreman doesn't like homeless people, which is like, it's such a big moment for Foreman, and the next scene is like, well, I don't really care how Foreman feels about homeless people.
We are supposed to. We're the ones that are supposed to care.
That's true. I just like, if you'd have like then looked at like, because Chase has some interesting stuff, Cameron has some interesting stuff. It would have been good to then reset and go back to that. It's maybe it would just be a case of jumbling the series around.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. Maybe who knows? This might have been a really early episode. This might have been supposed to be episode 2, but they released it as like episode 10. So we'll never know. But it definitely feels weird in the run of it, like just the way that House is and the amount of time spent on Foreman. I know. I'm curious. I don't know. I couldn't find anything about it, and I did actually try and research this. There's something up with this episode's placement, though. Because it feels like a filler episode when it shouldn't.
Yeah. And we also have to come to the B plot, which is the clinic cases.
Well, the lack of clinic cases.
Oh, a lack of clinic cases. It's a kind of subplot. It's more obviously a subplot that looks into histories and two medical interns looking at these things. Are they interns or students?
Yeah, I think they're like fellows or whatever they're called.
Right, interns or something. Yeah. And they bring in two conflicting case histories of a patient, and then he goes and tries to crack the code, and he does with surprising success.
Yeah, what is the story? It's that she has like a weird memory disorder where she doesn't have any memories, so she just picks up on the last thing that she saw and makes a narrative out of it.
Yeah, it's
Which
Korsakoff's, which is also associated with alcoholism. So she's had alcohol poisoning, prolific alcohol poisoning, which is insane.
yeah. But actually, sorry, I only just really realized this, but there's a bit of you're right about the thematic tie, because the House uses her as an example about how I think he says treat everyone like they have Korsakoff's, because he's saying that everyone will claw together a narrative that they think works and like allows them to function, which is quite interesting. And there's a bit going on in this episode. Like, it's really well written. Like, even the fact that B plot is kind of silly, and it's just he just sends out 2 interns to basically fail at solving a really complicated case.
Yeah.
That's kind of where he gets his kicks. But then the fact that he like diagnoses that it's Korsakoff's, goes in, proves this point that she like doesn't really have any stable or real memories, and she's just kind of clawing things together, and then it kind of ties in slightly. And it's all right. It's pretty good.
Well, it's drilling home that point of medical histories. They can as much be affected by the person's internal thoughts as they can be by external stimuli. If you ask for a certain recall of memory and you ask for it in a certain way, maybe you might get a different version of events or even a different interpretation of those events. So you have to treat everyone as if they've got Korsakoff's and then try and construct something out of that. Except in that case, because he actually identifies a medical condition. So it kind of undercuts the point a little bit, but there you go.
Yeah. Then there's a weird scene where House bribes a police officer. I don't know what this is trying to say about police officers.
Well, it's the typical Houseian skepticism about authority.
Which he turns out to be right about.
Yeah, as he always does when confronting the authority, like any source of authority. Or in some cases, Mr. Chase, David Chase, will just make them out to sound like sociopaths or idiots.
David Shaw.
Oh my God.
You've done it as well.
There's
way too many. I found out the guy who writes The Wire is also called David something.
David Simon.
That's it. So many fucking Davids. But yeah, you're right. Hey, this police officer works for the state, therefore he's a fucking idiot.
Not an idiot or a liar or a brute or a sociopath or whatever, you name it. Any negative attribute you want to impress upon them that isn't a doctor, although House has skepticism about most doctors as well. Yeah.
It's so funny because it's a weird scene because he like asks him the same question like 4 or 5 times. The guy just denies it, and then House walks in and goes, "Oh yeah, he actually did taser her." Because so the setup is that she runs away from the hospital. The police bring her back in, and her heart rate's really high, and it's the one symptom that doesn't make any sense. So House assumes it's a taser, and it's just another one of those cases of David Shaw just writing just a really kind of stupid, ignorant, kind of mean-spirited sort of person of authority. It's very funny. It just keeps coming up. The judge, the CPS worker, the teacher, just all deeply unpleasant people.
Let's not make this a problem. And she's just, the CPS worker's just there standing with a cop.
That was my favourite one. The CPS worker is incredible. Like, you got 20 seconds to say goodbye to your mentally ill mom. Why are they in such a rush? Oh yeah, so this is where it finds out because the patient bit Foreman. So Foreman actually ends up catching what she had, which was rabies, which is quite terrifying because her rabies has progressed too far, so she's dead. But
that's a nice phrase. She's just dead.
Well, she's done. But Foreman like almost dies. Rabies is one of those things that turns up a lot in like if you look at a Reddit post where it's like, what are the craziest ways to die? Rabies always turns up. It's like one of those interesting horror stories because it's a fascinating disease with like it's got the high kill count and it's got interesting symptoms. It's like, it's one of those things that's morbidly fascinating. It's like that serial killers sort of, it's one of those good ones. So
one of those good ones. That's a good way to put it.
It's something that fascinates people. It's like something that most people know. It is quite weird that the team takes so long to diagnose this. I don't know, though, if this is... Because I know rabies is really rare to actually have.
Yeah.
I know that, like, it's not rare. There's, like, lots of cases of people being bitten by potentially rabid animals, but the treatment for it is, like, really enforced by the US government. But it's quite interesting that the team takes so long to like, work it out. I don't know. It's a disease that even while watching it, I was like, oh, this looks like rabies because of the hydrophobia and stuff. So it's quite interesting. I guess it shows the difference between, maybe it is difficult to diagnose rabies. But it's such a famous disease that it's quite interesting that it takes so long for them to work it out.
But then again, they didn't have complete histories. They were working on a number of assumptions. And they worked to the best of their abilities to find the issue. Because they also, remember, she actually had tuberculomas in her lungs as well. So the idea that it might be potentially a cancer was also floated, or tuberculosis was floated. So, to give them the benefit of the doubt with that, because they just didn't have enough data to work on it.
Yeah. Fair enough.
So we get to the part where they unpack her entire history, and it's both Wilson and Foreman discovering this together, two sides of the same coin, two influenced by their past to make decisions about the present.
Although we then do go on to learn about Wilson. I wouldn't say it... there's definitely, like, the stuff we've already learned about Wilson, about him potentially like being about to have an affair, is certainly an interesting side to Wilson that we haven't seen. But yeah, this backstory about him having a homeless brother that he saw in a certain place 12 years ago, and he goes and sits there hoping to see him again. I think it's a very interesting little piece of backstory, and I genuinely can't remember if it comes later in the series, but you were telling me before this that you thought it was a bit weird.
Well, yeah. But
is it just a bit much?
I don't know.
For you?
I guess we didn't know about Wilson's backstory until the end, and I guess it just ties that kind of impassioned plea that he gave to House. I guess it ties that up very well. But yeah, I think in this, it's like there's the kind of ethics of looking after homeless people, and the assumptions we make about their lives is an issue too. Foreman is one of these people who believes in that people should pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
Yeah.
And being confronted by the gross unfairness of this patient's life made him think twice.
Yeah. Because it's quite interesting, because the reason I think the writers think that it's interesting that Foreman dislikes homeless people is because Foreman comes from like a really impoverished background from what we've learned about him. And he even says, like, I've known a lot of homeless people. So it's, you'd have expected Foreman to be more empathetic, but he isn't, because, like, I don't know a lot of homeless people, but I know that the reasons for being homeless are more complicated than just didn't try hard enough.
Yeah.
And homelessness is like, it's got to be in like the top 5 of worst things that can happen to you.
Well, regardless of that, I don't want to get into the kind of personal ethics of it and get into the story, but it's that kind of those kind of assumptions, and I guess it tries to strike that line, that kind of ethical line, and then also the kind of medical ethics of looking after, of discerning histories in a more as objectively as you can,
Yeah.
And that's why House says treat everyone as though they have Korsakoffs, that they fabricate their stories and delve into what's actually there, look for the fact patterns rather than the interpretations of the data, try and find the data, I guess.
Because, yeah, it even comes out with Wilson's ending where he's, like, sitting and, you know, just sitting in that square looking for his brother or waiting for him, like, it's like, does Wilson have a deep care for homeless people? Or does he just feel such guilt over not doing anything about his brother being homeless?
Yeah.
That's why he cares for them. Like, you got to work out how genuine that compassion is.
Yeah.
Or is it just overridden with guilt and just covered up with other things?
Well, yeah.
It's interesting.
That is a very interesting that kind of gets to the crux of the interpretive dilemma that they have. Like, how far cynical do you have to go? Or how much compassion do you need to use when treating a patient? And kind of it's a bit of... I think in this episode, although House is always treated as a bit of a guru, he's kind of half right. You have to be searching for the fact pattern, but you also have to have some kind of compassion for the treatment of the patient as a patient.
Well, maybe that's why they make him so, like, not take a stance in this one. Maybe they are just trying to demonstrate that kind of, that point where you need to be cynical, but not too cynical. He's like the mediator for that. Because I guess if it was just House, he could just come out and just be super cynical. Just be like, Wilson, you're a total idiot. And then it would just be 2 versus 1 and kind of the whole theme and point would be stripped a bit.
Yeah. But it was good of you to kind of notice that conflict between Wilson and Foreman. And in that way, it is really well written, very economically written, because it sets up that conflict very quickly between Wilson and Foreman and their different views on this subject, and then finding out why. I think they get to Foreman's view very quickly, but it's the Wilson's view that we don't. That kind of keeps you dangling, kind of waiting for it to be revealed.
Because we do just assume, based on what we've seen on Wilson, it's like, oh, there's Wilson being a nice guy.
Being a goody two-shoes again.
But there is more there. Yeah. There's definitely more there.
Yeah.
So, in summation, if you could give your differential diagnosis, what would you... Because I know you've got into a lot of it, but what would your final thoughts be on the episode as a whole? It's
well written, but I think at this point in the series, I feel like I've had a lot of Foreman, a lot of him in conflict with others, which isn't a bad thing because we learn a lot about him, but I just don't feel like I'm learning much about the rest of the team. I don't feel like I'm getting to appreciate Cameron as much, even though we've got that kind of glimpse about her own views on death and marriage and relationships. And on the other hand, you get Chase's kind of tetchiness with kind of alcoholism and being a carer for someone, but also his very complex views and concerns about religion as well. It feels like Foreman just gets this big thing about everything's to do with Foreman's kind of ego getting in the way of his conceptions getting in the way of things. I'd like to see him take a bit more of a back step. Let's see more of the other characters in the next couple of episodes.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I think that might be some reason why I feel this episode's just a little bit too... it's like Foreman fatigue.
Yeah.
But that being said, if I was to treat this episode on its own merits, it's well written. The ending is a little bit kind of inexplicable, very difficult to discern an overall mood or lesson from it, in the sense of, because the character, the patient dies, whereas you see in the other episodes there's a bit more to it than that. But apart from that, very well written, deals with very complex ethical subject matters about how physicians should conduct themselves when dealing with a patient, and also deals with the very pressing socioeconomic issue of homelessness. So I think in the 2 thumbs up, 2 thumbs down system by Roger Ebert, rest in peace, or Ebert, I'll give this a 1 thumbs up.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think, I don't know, us talking about it's made me appreciate the episode more.
Oh.
I didn't even really notice how the, I didn't really think about how the Korsakov's like beep subplot was connected that much. But I think there's more going on than I gave it credit for, which I quite like. That's why I like doing this podcast. Like, I think there's more to this show than often it's given credit for. And I think the fact that we can talk pretty swiftly for like 45 minutes about just one episode in like a 22 episode like series, just about a grumpy doctor and his team, and like I think there's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's something about this episode that bothers me, and I think it's the Foreman fatigue thing. I think you're right. I just think it's like nothing wrong with Foreman. It's just he's just had a lot of episodes focused on him. And I remember getting to the end of this episode, and even though in hindsight I think there's actually a lot here, it's just like it feels like there's nothing special. I think it's because it's all centered around Foreman, which is a shame. It's because it would just be nice to learn about the other characters. So Foreman's trilogy could have been The Lord of the Rings, but it's The Hobbit.
Oh wow.
No, it's not that bad. No, this I genuinely, after chatting about this, I think there's more to this episode. I actually think it's really well written, and economic writing is a good way of putting it. Like they always jam in so much like good interconnected writing in these. And thematically it's interesting. It delves into a very interesting like aspect of not only like medical ethics about like making assumptions about your patients, but just in terms of the characters, it's interesting. And I do like the Wilson reveal. I think it gives a bit more to Wilson. Okay. But other aspects like them going on a treasure hunt at the end is just really out of place.
Yeah.
When you like think about them being like, mid-30s, like just people with lives, it's a strange thing for them to do. I don't know. It's a little less subtle than I'd like it to be.
Yeah, the motivations for investigating the lives of patients in other episodes has always been very pressing. It's like, find out what the problem is. This was, let's find out more about the past of this character, and let's put the 2 people who were in conflict with each other in that scenario. And it's just like, oh, what?
Yeah, and it's like after she's dead as well, like it would have been nice, like a twist on it. Obviously, I'm not just rewriting an episode that came out 14 years ago, but if it could have been like, if the patient didn't know something, like if James was still alive, let's say, and he'd been put up for adoption or something, and she was like, oh, I just need to tell like my baby that I love him or something. And then maybe if Foreman had like gone looking for him and found him and like passed on the news, so it would have been like in memoriam to her, or like, done something in her honor to make up for him assuming that she had nothing to her.
Yeah.
But actually finds out this whole person, like that would be a bit much, but just as like an offshoot idea, like that would be related. But
yeah, there was just
them just kind of, oh, I'm a bit curious.
There was no real sense of urgency in revealing that information. And that just did not come across. And that's the bit that I think was the disconnect. It wasn't as logical as the other kind of investigations into patients' pasts. It's a little bit, it was just trying to, in my opinion, being a little bit too highfalutin.
Yeah. What does that mean? I can kind of assume what it means in the context, but go on.
Yeah, just a little bit over flowery and over dramatic.
Fair enough.
And a bit too highbrow, I think. Would be a good way to put it.
Well, like the fact they follow the comic books and it literally has a picture of a room with a box in the top
Oh,
corner.
with the
Uh,
heart symbol over
yeah,
the
and they
door.
literally open the box and it's, I mean,
No one's been in here for a long time. It's like,
yeah, it's
oh,
like been
come
there
on,
for
man.
years and it's like literally got all of the documentation necessary for them to work out the entire backstory. But what's really funny is, like, not saying much, but it's in a pretty rough area. It's a rundown building. It's an abandoned building. I'm pretty sure it'd be used as a squat. If I was in a squat and I found a box full of fucking like official ID and like birth certificates, I might sell that. I don't think that box would have sat there for 2 years
Well, you'd be burning it for
undisturbed.
firewood. I don't know. Well,
It's worth a fortune, that box,
really?
to the right
All
people.
right. Oh, that's worrying. I'm not leaving you with any boxes of important information. Oh,
Only if I get like addicted to heroin and have to go on the streets.
oh, okay.
No, well, that isn't happening. No, you can trust me.
Okay. I'd say the other factor is that you look at the previous episode,
Yeah.
and that was just phenomenal. It was just such a good episode.
Mm. A great Foreman episode as well.
Yes, I must admit. But DNR was just so good. It had really good acting in it. It had good writing in it. It really, and as much as it was it was a Foreman episode, it was a House episode as well.
Yeah.
Because at the end you just get that exchange between the patient,
Henry Giles.
played by Harry Lennox, interacting with House, and he reveals something about him.
Yeah, but it was a great patient episode as well.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, so House, you're right, like it explored House, but it did also explore the patient by bouncing off House, and this kind of tries to do that, like it explores the patient as well, but it doesn't do it anywhere near as subtly. Like, the patient for the most part is just having a total psychiatric break because she's got rabies.
Mm.
So the time they find out about her is kind of afterwards in a scene where they just go and look in a box.
Mm.
It's not quite as,
but
yeah, as you say, it's a bit over the top. It's not quite as well done.
But I think that's a factor as well. You go from such a high with DNR, and then you go to something just a little bit less. Only just a little, a fair bit. Well, okay, little might be over being too kind. A fair bit below DNR, and you think you do notice the difference, and you notice it in the way that we've been talking about it. I mean, in this episode, there is a lot there, but it just doesn't feel like it gets to the real nub of it in a very powerful way, as it did in DNR at the end.
No, you're right. I think that's really got to the heart of it. It's not just about Foreman. I think, yeah, as you say, it's more about that in comparison to what we've just seen, it doesn't hit as hard, and it's got all the components are there, but they're just a bit flabby in that way.
It's how you mix them together.
Well, I would consider that season 1, episode 10, Histories, differentially diagnosed. I think we've got to the heart of the disease. Too flabby. Flabby.
We're all diseased then.
Yeah, he's the patient has overdosed on Foreman. He's in the hospital. He's flabby. And just like this podcast, I guess we've been talking about this for ages.
Yeah.
It's really weird. The really complex episodes that we really like, we actually talk about less than the episodes that we don't like. Really interesting.
Well, it gets to the point much easier.
Yeah, it's true. We can just say what we saw and we go, that's really great. Whereas we actually have to like diagnose more. Like, 'cause this episode's a weird one because it's really good, but there's something wrong with it.
Yeah.
And we both felt it. Like, we don't really discuss these episodes before we get on the podcast. We kind of, when we run through our notes about what we're going to talk about, that's when we say what we felt. And I don't think we're not those people who like, oh, let's like shit talk something because that's entertaining. We wouldn't be making this if we didn't really like the show.
Yeah.
But we both identified that there was something not quite there, and I kind of think we got to the bottom of that.
Yeah, it was that we had an intuition about it, and we had to really kind of examine that intuition, and that takes time.
Mm.
And I hope,
lots of time.
Hopefully, our audience appreciates that, and it's not just us being overly self-indulgent and going, "Oh, we don't know what's going on,"
yeah,
or being incompetent, which might be true.
Any feedback is great because we are always worried about that.
Yeah.
Because we enjoy talking about this, but if we're putting it out there, we'd like people to enjoy it as well. So yeah, just let us know. We've got our Twitter at House MD Cast. We have a Facebook page as well. Or just leave us a review on like iTunes or any of them. Leave us a 5-star one if you like it. Leave us a 1-star one
if you hate my voice
with your notes. That is still bothering Kaz. That someone said they didn't like his voice when this was posted on Reddit.
I did think about just going
12 points as well.
Transcribing
12 up likes.
Transcribing all that I say and then putting it into a text-to-speech processor, and then just recording that, and then you can just place that wherever it needs to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, after I saw that comment, I came up to you and I said, Gaz, you better sort it out because you're fired.
Yeah,
you're out of here, son. You are putting this at risk.
Yeah. So now I'm going on elocution lessons very soon, I promise.
Fantastic. Well, that aside, thank you very much for listening. Thanks for joining me, Gaz, to talk about this. It was good that we got to the bottom of that about why we both didn't really like that one.
Yes. And as always, it's a pleasure to be differentially diagnosing such wondrous episodes as Histories with you.
Thank you very much. I enjoy it as well. So it's Thursday today, bit of a late episode. The next episode will be out on Monday, as normal, and then we'll just continue on there where we're looking at probably one of my favourite episodes. This is the episode where if I show someone a house, I show them this. It's Season 1, Episode 11, Detox. So hope to see you then.